wanted to recognize you as a thoughtful leader for everything you have done and achieved. And I have asked Rajan to explain why we are delivering this prize, this award, special recognition award, for you, for everything you have achieved, but specifically for one thing.
Which is? This gentleman nearly won the Nobel Prize. He should have won the Nobel Prize for Peace. This is the second best. Exactly. Yeah, and yes, we did want to precede your talk by giving you this, and I know it's not the same, but hey, value it.
I forgot my cards, and fortunately, I put it here, so if you want to get in touch with me, I'll have it later on. Thank you so much. This is so special, and I'm very grateful for the word. Very, very grateful. Usually, should have maybe waited until after I talk, just in case I say something offensive, dumb. No. So hello, everyone. Good morning still. My name is Aziz Abu Sara. I'm from Jerusalem. That's where I grew up. Anybody heard of Jerusalem before? It's a small city, actually really a small city. Less than 1 million people live in Jerusalem. That's where I grew up. I'm a peacemaker. This is what I've been doing in the last 27 years now. And I started in this journey of peacemaking, of how can I connect people together, have traveled and worked in about 80 countries around the world, worked in media, worked in academia, worked in war zones, conflict zones, from Afghanistan to Colombia to Iran to Syria to pretty much anywhere you can imagine. I have been and worked there, both on education projects, worked with National Geographic in education, all these places. Now, I mention all of this because that's not how I grew up. Peacemaking was not something I even could imagine when I was a kid. If you asked me when I was 10 years old what you want to be, peacemaking was not going to be the answer I would have given you. And I think, oh, here we go. Yeah. I'm the little kid here. This is me when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. That's back in the days when, as my mom says, I used to still look good. So things don't work out as well as we get older sometimes. And next to me is my older brother, Taysir. I'm the youngest of 7 children, and I'm the youngest by 9 years. Taysir is 9 years older than me. I'm what you call the oops child. Was not planned for, and which doesn't really make much sense to me because my parents are very religious Muslim. They don't drink wine, and I think for an oops, you do need a bottle of wine to be involved. My assumption, I don't know. But my brother Taysir was killed when I was 10 years old. He was tortured by Israeli soldiers, ended up dying as a result of it. And you can imagine being 10 years old, your brother being killed, how would you respond to that? I'm going to ask you to join me. Answer at me if you want to even ask questions, if you're comfortable to do that. How would you feel if somebody kills your brother? Anger. Revenge, right. How many of you, if somebody punches you, if I walk down here and I go, bam, and I punch you right in the face, what would be your reaction? Punch back. I love it when people are honest. You have no idea how horrible when people go, I'll do nothing. I'm like, you're right. You will punch back. How many of you, if somebody punch you in the face, your first thought is, let me take a few steps backward and think about this logically? That's not what we do. We punch back if somebody hurts you. And especially when you're 10 years old, that's the only thing you think about. And so I grew up with that mindset. For 8 years, revenge was the only thing I could think about. until I was 18 years old. And this is when travel started changing my life. I was 18 years old and I realized that I didn't learn Hebrew because I refused to learn the language. It was to me the language of the enemy. And you don't go learn the language of the enemy. But if you live in Jerusalem, you don't speak Hebrew, it's a big problem. You're not going to work, you're not going to study, you're not going to do anything in life. And so I started looking for the best place to learn Hebrew, and it's a place called Ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to learn Hebrew to Israel. I signed up. I was the only Palestinian in that classroom. And I felt very uncomfortable. Now, I lived in Jerusalem. This class was in Jerusalem. The difference in distance between where I lived and where the Hebrew class was, 15, 20 minutes walk. And yet, it's a neighborhood I never went to. We didn't see each other. We were divided not by distance. We're divided by walls of ignorance, of fear, maybe of hatred, and didn't see each other, didn't talk to each other. So when we talk about travel, we so often talk about how far can we go. But the truth is, for me, the most impactful trip in my life was a trip that was just down the street from where I lived. And it was in that Hebrew class that the first time I met Jewish, Israeli people. We ended up becoming friends. We ended up working together. And that's what launched me into this piecework I was doing. And I realized at that point that when I was a kid, I thought I had no choice. If somebody hits you, you hit back. And then I realized that's not true. When I was in that Hebrew class, I realized I was being a slave to the person who killed my brother for those 8 years. Every time I chose hate, I chose revenge, I chose my rage, I was being a slave to the person who killed my brother. And it was doing the exact opposite that liberated me. Realizing forgiveness wasn't about the person who killed my brother, wasn't because they deserved it, it was because this is my choice. And so I set myself in this path that wanted to use whatever I do to cross boundaries, to connect people, to create a reality where people get to know each other. And that's how I ended up doing all the work I've been doing the last few years. And I started looking at stories from around us. Anybody knows who's this? The Medusa. And I started looking at stories. You know, these stories we tell on tours. If you've been to any place where there's a Greek mythology, this is one of the stories we often tell. And then realizing so much of our conflicts is we tell many stories wrong. And this is one of those stories. You know why the story of the Medusa is being told wrong? Often, what do we think about her? She is a monster, right? But she was not a monster. The Medusa was a beautiful girl who was serving in the temple of Athena when Poseidon decided to go and rape her. And instead of being given justice and support and help, she ended up having unhealed trauma, and Athena punished her for being raped. And so we think of her as monster. And one of the things I believe is really important for us to realize is that the only way to humanize a monster is the opposite of what we did to Medusa. The thought was, if you look into her eyes, you become stone. And I think it's exactly the opposite. We humanize monsters, or whoever we think is a monster, the moment we start looking at them and see them for who they are. People who are traumatized, people who have gone into unhealed trauma, people who have suffered and in need of justice as well. This is what helps change the world, is we have to start telling a different story than the popular ones. And I know I worked as a tour guide. We often used to joke that we don't want to ruin a good story with a fact sometimes even, but this is unlearning and relearning is something powerful. And revisiting some of our stories is really important as we talk about how the travel industry can change the reality in the world around us. We live in a world today where we are divided into teams. In this case, red and blue. This is research that was done where a group just like this, people who knew each other, were divided into given red t-shirts to one side, blue t-shirts on the other side, And within a millisecond, people start seeing each other as the other. Even though some of them were friends, they were in the same classroom. And then they even went beyond and said, what if we take a couple of you with a blue t-shirt and we give you a red t-shirt and move you there? And immediately this group became your enemy. And so there is that construct of us versus them. And I don't think it's possible to completely eliminate that. So what I propose in a lot of our work is that instead of seeing us versus them, Christian versus Jewish versus Muslim, white versus black versus brown, whatever, liberal versus conservative, whatever divisions you want to think about, I propose that the only division we have is those of us who believe in equality, who believe in justice, who believe in sustainability, who believe in peace, and those who don't yet. So yes, there is a division, but that division is not permanent. That division is not based on things we can't control. It's a division based on values, and so we all can be part of the same team. We all can be of the same tribe. In the last 2 years, I've been working with an Israeli, who you see him in this photo with me, Ma'ozinon, whose parents were killed on October 7th. He's an Israeli. He also comes from travel industry. He was the founder of the first guest house in Nazareth as an Israeli Jew, Nazareth, an Arab city in Israel. He told me the story of how he did that. And he said he went traveling around the world, went to South America, met indigenous people everywhere, went back to Israel and realized he was 30 years old and didn't know any Palestinians, didn't have any Palestinian friends. And he decided, I'm going to go and start a guest house in a Palestinian area. The biggest city, Arab city in Israel is Nazareth. And it was there that he started building those relationships. Now, eventually, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, his parents were killed, and the two of us came together because the two of us understood the power of travel. Both of us have traveled around the world. Both of us ended up entrepreneurs in the travel industry. And so we thought, let's bring our experience as travel entrepreneurs into our work in peace building. And the first step for me, the first thing that we have to internalize, those of us working in the travel industry, is travel is an act of peace building. Think about this again. Travel is an act of peace building. And as we started doing that, we were very grateful to be recognized by Pope Francis before he passed away, where he talked about to us, he told us, conflict is something normal. Everywhere in the world, you're going to have conflict. It's not about whether conflict will exist or not. It's about how do we deal with conflicts. Humans are the only species who can deal with conflict by talking to each other instead of killing each other. Such a powerful, powerful experience. We recently met with Pope Leo, who told us the same message. And he said, peace takes shape from the ground up, beginning with places, communities, local institutions. That speaks about tourism. That speaks about the industry that we are doing. 1.5 billion people will be traveling internationally this year. That's a significant number. That means literally every person almost in the world will interact through travel with somebody from a different culture, from a different place, from a different reality. And if we create the opportunity through travel to bring people together, to have that exchange of ideas, imagine what kind of world we can have. When travel is beyond only going to historical sites, archaeological sites, all of, beaches. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I enjoy it. I do all of this. I went to a Bible college in Jerusalem. As a kid, I grew up in a Muslim family. I wanted to give a heart attack to my parents, I guess. And I enjoyed studying archaeology. I love those kind of things, antiquities, going to old sites. But that's not the only thing we can do. If we're able to create a connection, much of the problems that we face in the world will be able to be solved. Much of the problems. Because it's through connections that we solve problems. It's through stories that we solve problems. I said the other night, my favorite quote is, travel makes you speechless, but then it turns you into a storyteller. But many times we can travel all around the world and come back home without a story to tell. To me, that's a worthless travel. If you went 5,000 miles away from your home and you spent 10 days somewhere on a trip and you come back home and you don't have a story of somebody you met, a connection you created, then there's something missing. And we're missing a massive opportunity as a travel industry. I think there's no industry in the world that can affect change and create new facts on the ground like the travel industry. There are research in sociology that says 3.5% of a community can change, 3.5% of any population, any country in the world, can change the social and political structure of that country if they are politically, or if they are committed and active in that work. 3.5%. We have way more than 3.5% who travel with us. That's the power of what travel can do. Way more than 1.5 billion, somebody can do the math for me. What, 15, 20% of people are traveling internationally every year. Way more than that travel within their own countries. Change is possible. Now, I know I mentioned travel is local, but sometimes when we travel internationally, we are able and willing to do things we wouldn't do otherwise. This is my father. Me and him argue. I can tell you this. I'm really patient, very good in peacemaking until me and my dad start talking. He can push the buttons that nobody else can. And he's 88 right now. He came to visit the States a few years back. His first time in America. I can write a whole book about my dad just being in America. Doesn't speak English. He's like, this country is weird. And he's right. And then he arrives on Tuesday and he goes, I want to go to the mosque on Friday. I'm like, okay, I'll set you up. Somebody take you to the mosque. And so I found somebody who will take him. He goes, comes back, and I ask him, how was the mosque? And he said, well, we didn't pray in the mosque. I'm like, well, what do you mean you didn't pray in the mosque? That's where I sent you. He said, we got there and it was too full. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, it was winter. Did you pray outside? It was too cold. I'm sorry. And he said, no, we went across the street and we prayed in the synagogue. I said, prayed in the synagogue? I'm confused. Muslims, by the way, just in case you're not as confused as me, don't usually pray in synagogues. And he was very excited. And it dawned on me, my dad grew up all his life in Jerusalem. And I said, have you ever been to a synagogue before? And he said, no. 80 plus years in Jerusalem, and let me tell you, Jerusalem has quite a few synagogues. And yet, his first time ever walking into a synagogue, it took him going 6,000 miles away to the United States so he can do something he could have done home, but was less scary when you do it far away. We can push ourselves out of our comfort when we are traveling. And he got so excited, he started calling my brothers, my uncle, my aunt. And he's like, guess where I prayed today? And they're like, it's Friday. You prayed in the mosque. And he's like, no, I prayed in a synagogue. He was so excited about it. And they all go, Aziz, did you convert our dad to Judaism? No, that's not what happened. But this is the stuff tourism can do. Hope, as we see issues around the world, one of the biggest questions I always get is, how do you have hope seeing so many wars, so many problems, so many issues, conflicts, massacres? I mean, you watch television or social media, it is terrifying. I have friends in Israel, I have friends in Gaza, I have friends in the West Bank who are suffering on a daily basis, but I have friends all over the world, from Sudan to Congo. How do you have hope seeing so much pain? I say, hope is something you don't find and you don't lose. Hope is something we do. Hope is something we create. If you sit home doing nothing, you will never have hope. But the thing about travel industry, it's all about action. We all go, we all do things. And so there's no industry better than creating hope than what we do. Hope is about creating something together. And the cool thing about travel, it's most of the times people coming together, traveling, meeting others, doing activities together. And you can do so much with that. You know, it also inspires things you never thought are possible. There's a quote that often attributed to Kafka that says, by believing passionately in something that still does not exist, we create it. In believing passionately in something that still does not exist, we create it. Because the non-existent is whatever we have not sufficiently desired. So when we go around and we think something is impossible, and then we meet people who are doing it, it changes our perception. You go to a place like Egypt. Often we also see the world as first world, second world, third world. It's not true. There's always something you can learn wherever you go. And you go to Egypt, you go to a place like Garbage Collector City, which I have to admit, when I convince people to go there, the name doesn't help. But you go to Garbage Collector City, and it's one of the best examples of recycling on earth, where over 85% of the garbage is recycled, where 70,000+ people work in recycling in that area. It's a Christian neighborhood. It changes your whole mind about Egypt. Yes, the pyramids are important. You got to go and visit them. Abu Simbel is amazing. To me, Garbage Collector City is one of the most inspirational places, because even if you're a European here, you go there and you learn that no European city does better recycling than Garbage Collector City. Nowhere in Europe, nowhere, I think almost in the world, does better than that. So you see the impossible happening. But often we think, oh, do travelers really want to go there? And I argue they do. This is the whole concept of what brought me to travel, is that travelers do want to do that, do want to see a different world, do want to have inspiration. Rajan mentioned my work in dual narrative travel. And the idea came is that what if we bring two people from different backgrounds and have them guide together? But even let's go a bit more. What if we bring two people who are enemies and we make them guide together? Now, in this photo, do you see two enemies? Anybody? Do you see enemies? Do they look like they hate each other? No, they don't. However, once upon a time they did. This is in Derry, London, Derry. And Ann Walker was an IRA fighter. James was a fighter on the other side. He spent 5 years in prison for blowing up a coffee shop. The two of them, if they met 30 years ago, would have killed each other. And yet, look at them today. And so I brought Anne, who ended up doing theater and trauma and dealing with the trauma of her life through theater work, and James, and asked them if they want to become tour guides. And so brought them together, we worked together, and now they are two of our best tour guides in Northern Ireland. And when people come, they expect them to fight and argue and, oh, what's going to happen? And when they leave, they're like, are you a couple? Because they're so good together that people are not, they can't believe that they're not actually a couple. And on the tour, you get to learn how divisions exist and how people can bridge those divisions. And when I spend a day with them, I leave believing that in my own conflict, Israel and Palestine, that we can solve it. Because if they could, we also can. There's an inspiration that comes from this kind of relationship. Now again, we'll do Giant Causeway and we'll do all of that, but to me, this is the part of the trip that changes my life and changes the life of everyone who comes on that trip. And she guides as well. One of our guides is a former British soldier. One is a former reverend who's a peace activist now, and so on. But that's that dual narrative. In Israel and Palestine, tiny actions have lasting ripples. And I love this saying because we often think, oh, but this is so small. Okay, two people do work together. It's not. Small actions make a huge difference. Look, my teacher did a small action when I went to study Hebrew. She came to me and realized I was afraid, I was uncomfortable, And she just welcomed me with the only 2 Arabic words I think she knew, and had a big smile. And that's why I'm standing here today, because of one person who decided to treat me like a human being. Small actions make a huge rebel effects. And I'll give you another example. This is 2 tour guides from Israel and Palestine, Hussam and Yuval. Both met through working together on our trips there. Hussam is Palestinian, Yuval is Israeli. I'll give you small examples of the ripple effects. Hussam, being a Palestinian, can't vote in Israel. So Yuval told him, what if I and we can start this thing saying, since our politics affect you, I'm going to ask you, who do you want me to vote for? And I'm giving you my vote. And it ended up going from 1 person to 100 person to 1,000 person to thousands of persons who did it in that year. And started from this, from 2 people doing work together. When Yuval decided to get married, him and his fiancée at the time, Alicia, both Israeli, both Jewish, guess who they asked to officiate their wedding? Not a rabbi. They asked their Palestinian friend, the tour guide he worked with for the last many years, Hussam, who came in and basically became the rabbi. And you have a Muslim rabbi officiating a wedding of 2 Israeli Jews. These are the stories that are missing in our media, that we don't hear about, that we think don't exist, and it's because of it we think there is no hope in the world we live today. But you can imagine every traveler that goes with these 2, what kind of faith and what kind of hope in the humanity and what kind of action it would inspire in them. And so when I share these stories, I'm sharing them to say, there's so much potential in what we do, so much potential. And I can go on and on many examples. This is in Vietnam. One of my fun things to do is I love to go and develop these kind of trips. This is in Vietnam, where I tracked down the first Vietnamese pilot who shot down an American plane. And he himself was shot down. And I learned later that he became friends with the person he shot down and the person who shot him down. They found each other and became friends. And so I asked him if he would talk to our tours, and he did. And in this photo, you have an American vet who fought in Vietnam with a Vietnamese pilot who also fought. And again, you look at them and you don't see enemies. You see a reunion. You see an amazing conversation happening. And this is in his home, where he hosted us for coffee and tea and some fruits, and learned about his life, talked about war, talked about why war isn't the answer, and so on. And those experiences make a big, big difference. But it doesn't have to be only, it's not only changing the travelers, it's also changing the realities on the ground. I don't have the photo for it here, but one of my favorite places I worked in is Colombia. And I went to Colombia right when the peace dialogue was going on, negotiations, worked a little bit around that. And one of the things I worked on too is, how do we integrate former militants to become part of the society? And the first industry that came to my mind, tourism. You bring tourism into the midst. These are people who knew areas in Colombia that nobody else knows. Let's take them and make them tour guides. And then we thought, this can go beyond just militants, maybe even gangs, maybe even other neighborhoods that we can do that. And one of my friends that I met there ended up reaching out to a gang in Bogota, in a neighborhood called Egipto, and convinced the gang there to basically quit being a gang and become all tour guides. This neighborhood used to be the most dangerous neighborhood you can go to in Bogota. So much so that the guy who ran the gang told me, if you came in here, our claim to fame, you will never leave with your phone or your wallet. And now, everyone is a tour guide. Everyone's working in tourism. And I asked him, what makes you more money? And he said, no, stealing definitely makes more money. But doing the work I'm doing now in tourism gives me a peace of mind. Gives me the ability to sleep at night. Gives me the ability to not to worry about my kids and what future they're going to have. So tourism transformed the whole society, a whole community in that neighborhood. And it's one of my favorite places still when I go to Colombia to visit. Now again, I share all of this, and I always get back to the point I'm making here, because people will continue always to tell me, oh, but our travelers want to have fun. And this, I don't know. I said, I do too. I'm a photographer. This is an example of my photography. I spend hours trying to take photos. I literally spent about 4 hours for this photo, waiting until the sun hit the lion in the right spot, until he looks towards me. I had to convince him, negotiated with the lion. Much easier than negotiating with the humans sometimes. So I love those moments. But to me still, after every trip, when I ask people what made a difference, what is the one memory you will leave with, it's always the people they meet. This is the photo I'm most proud of in my life, I think. It's a Vietnamese woman who was 90 years old, and we ended up in her home and with her husband, who was 92 years old when I met them. And they were still farming, still working, made us some tea, sat in the farm. And by the way, I asked what's a secret to long life, and they told me, this is just between us, it's beer, apparently. That's what they said. Not wine, I'm sorry. But in Vietnam, it's beer. In France, it's wine. And she told us her life story. She told us where she comes from. She told us through the war, where they hid. That's the stories that lingers. And until the day I die, this is a story I'll never forget. These are the stories that stay with you and change you, change who you are. These are the moments that are unforgettable. And this is in the changing reality of today with AI and with there's a lot of conversation. Is AI going to take away from us what we do in the travel industry? A lot of stuff will go away. A lot of jobs might disappear. But here's the thing. AI will never be able to do this. AI can't find these people. AI will not. I'm working now on a trip, designing a trip in Japan. The way I'm working on it, I found a friend who I met at National Geographic named Ari. And Ari his grandfather was on the plane that dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was on both. He's the only person who was on both. And he ended up growing up, going to Japan and looking for victims of that bomb and building relationship with them and doing this work against nuclear weapons. And he found these people, and especially one woman who her grandfather was one of the people who was a victim of both bombs. He narrowly escaped Hiroshima, went to hide in Nagasaki, ends up being hit again with a nuclear bomb. And so the two of them became now the most outspoken, very famous people in Japan. They going all over, talking all over the world about why nuclear weapons are not good. They designing the trip for us in Japan. Google can't do that. AI can't do that. This is the future of where the added value of what we humans can do that no AI can do. And so I'll end with a couple of stories, if that's okay. Do I have time for? Do I have a lot of time? Then I can keep going on. There is an Israeli author named Yehuda Amichai. And Yehuda Amichai has this story that goes, it's a poem, I'm paraphrasing it. He says, basically, sitting at David's Gate in Jerusalem, he says, I see a tour guide with his tourists, and he's like, I was with my fruit and vegetables for my family, and I sit by David's Gate, and the tour guide uses me as a moving target. And he says, you see that man there sitting with fruit and vegetables? He's not important. But up a little to the left, there is a Roman arch. That's important. It's 2,000 years old. And then he goes, redemption will come when that same tour guide will say, see that Roman arch? Leave it aside. But a little bit to the right, a little bit down, there sits a man who have fruit and vegetables for his family. That's what's important. And you know what, to me, incredible is I started reading more and more peace work, And I keep finding the intersectionality between tourism and peace building. And one of my favorite poems today is a poem by Samih al-Qasim, a Palestinian poet. And he says in it, "The day I'm killed, my killer rifling through my pockets will find 3 traveling tickets. 1 to peace, 1 to the fields and the rain, and 1 to the conscience of a humankind. So I beg you, my killer, do not waste such a thing. Take these tickets and travel." And I love that connection, is that travel and peace building so connected together. There is no way we can separate them. So when we look at the world and we see so much division, we see so many problems, don't think what others can do. Think, what is it that me and my company, and my organization, how can we add one activity of peace building to the work we're doing? How do we make one connection? How do we bring voices? There are so many people wherever we travel. And by the way, not only in Egypt and Israel and Palestine, Colombia, here in Europe as well. There are so many voices that are not given the opportunity to speak, the unheard voices. And I remember speaking to a very high executive once of one of the biggest travel companies in the world, and he was English, and he said, "This dual narrative thing works, but not in London. We don't have multiple narratives in London." Like, I don't know, what London did you live in? Because the London I've been to has so many narratives and so many voices and so many stories that we don't know and we don't hear. And so what if that travel industry can actually bring those voices, can actually be part of that change? And don't think, how can I change the whole world? Because that's usually what makes us feel indifferent, because we think, I can't change the whole world. And I'll end with this story. I was working in Syria with a colleague of mine who was much younger, studying conflict resolution, my program, and we get into Syria and I meet thousands of children who not going to school, being injured, who you can see the suffering on their faces. They internally displaced kids. And I had a nervous breakdown. I never felt more powerless than that moment. And I ended up eventually being hospitalized for it. It was such a painful moment to just see thousands of kids and say, I can't help them. And this younger person who I literally was teaching her goes, "You're thinking about this totally wrong. You're thinking, what can you do to help 5 million kids? Don't think that way. What if you and I come back in the summer and we invite a few of our friends, if anybody willing, and we do a summer camp for these kids? Just us. And we see who wants, we might get 20, 30, 50 kids. We'll help 1 kid. That's what matters." And so we go back, we get 9 of us, and we set up a camp, and we have 450 kids show up. 9 people, 450 kids. That is exactly when I decided I will never have kids of my own. Those kids drove me crazy. Like, I love working with kids for a week and then be able to leave. But out of that program that started with 9 volunteers, we paid ourselves for the whole thing. Didn't have any donor, didn't have any foundation. We just ourselves did it. Ended up starting a school in that area. That school ended up becoming another summer camp in Jordan. That summer camp in Jordan became a school in Jordan. Then we started summer camp in Lebanon. That summer camp in Lebanon became a school in Lebanon. Started another one in Turkey. That one in Turkey became a school. And suddenly, and all done by volunteers and all funded by us. No big donation, no big foundation, no anything. And until today, I'm in touch with these kids who back then they were 12, 11, 10, who are now in college or have finished college. And I look at their faces and I think, okay, I couldn't save the whole world, but if we're able to change one person's life, whether it's a traveler with us, a local where we're able to go, that is in reality how we change the world. Thank you.